The boardroom fell silent as my father's words hung in the air. 15 years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and millions in revenue I'd personally generated, all reduced to a wooden plaque that might as well have said, "Thanks for keeping the seat warm." I smiled through gritted teeth, raising my champagne flute as the executives around me celebrated my sister's visionary leadership. Nobody noticed my hand trembling, or the plans already forming in my mind. They thought this was my end. Little did they know it was just my beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to watch someone else take the credit? I'm Alex Chen, and that's exactly what happened to me at Meridian Technologies, the software company my father started in our garage when I was just 12 years old. The day everything changed started like any other. Seattle rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian's downtown headquarters, an impressive contrast to the leaky roof of that garage where I'd written my first lines of code alongside Dad. Back then, we were just a scrappy two-person operation surviving contract to contract. Now, we occupied 3 floors of prime downtown real estate, employed over 200 people, and had just cleared $100 million in annual revenue. I'd arrived early as usual, reviewing quarterly projections with my coffee when my father's administrative assistant messaged me. Emergency executive meeting, 10 a.m. boardroom. No agenda attached, which was unusual, but not unprecedented. Perhaps another acquisition opportunity or a surprise client win. I didn't think much of it until I walked in and saw my sister Sophie sitting at my father's right hand, practically glowing with barely contained excitement. Dad rarely brought her to executive meetings. Her role as chief marketing officer was mostly ceremonial, a position created after she got bored with her fashion blog and decided corporate life might be more interesting. She'd spent the past 3 years cycling through departments, never staying long enough to witness the consequences of her innovative disruptions. My father, Richard Chen, cleared his throat as I took my seat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I've brought you here to share some news that's been in the works for some time. As COO and heir apparent, I'd been involved in every major company decision for the past decade, or so I thought. My stomach tightened as I realized this meeting was a complete surprise to me. As you know, I turn 65 next month, he continued. After much reflection, I've decided it's time for me to step back from day-to-day operations and focus on strategic advisory. This wasn't unexpected. We'd had preliminary succession discussions for years. What came next, however, hit me like a freight train. I'm pleased to announce that Sophie will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The boardroom erupted in congratulatory murmurs while I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. Sophie? CEO? The same Sophie who'd once accidentally deleted our client database because the interface was too complicated? The same Sophie who'd spent the company's entire Q3 marketing budget on an influencer campaign that generated exactly 0 qualified leads. My father raised his hand, quieting the room. Alex has done tremendous work as our COO, building our operations to where they are today. He'll continue in that role, supporting Sophie as she takes Meridian into its next chapter. Supporting Sophie. Always supporting, never leading. Someone passed around champagne flutes. My father proposed a toast to Meridian's bright future, while Sophie beamed beside him. I raised my glass mechanically, muscle memory from years of corporate etiquette masking the earthquake happening inside me. Speech, called our CFO, Derek, always eager to curry favor with whoever held power. Sophie stood, smoothing her designer blazer that cost more than my first car. This is such an honor, she gushed, tossing her perfectly highlighted hair. I know some of you might be surprised. Her eyes flickered momentarily to me. But Dad and I have been planning this transition for months. Months. While I'd been securing our largest government contract to date, They'd been plotting behind my back. Meridian needs fresh vision, she continued. We've been too focused on enterprise solutions when the real growth is in consumer applications. Too concerned with stability when we should be disrupting ourselves before someone else does it for us. Each word was a knife twisting deeper. The enterprise solutions she dismissed so casually had grown our revenue by 40% year over year. The stability she mocked had earned us loyalty from blue-chip clients who valued reliability over flashy features that broke in production. "Alex," my father called, "come up here and congratulate your sister properly." The walk to the front of the room felt like crossing a minefield in slow motion. Every eye tracked me, gauging my reaction, measuring my loyalty. I fixed my face into what I hoped resembled genuine support. "Sophie," I said, turning to face our executive team. "I remember when you were 16 and Dad first brought you to the office." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "You were so excited to help that you reorganized our entire filing system." Sophie's smile wavered slightly. She remembered what came next. "It took us 3 weeks to find the Johnson contract, which almost cost us our biggest client at the time." I paused, letting that sink in. "But that's what family does, right? We clean up each other's messes." My father's face darkened, but I wasn't finished. "To our new CEO," I raised my glass again. "May your vision be clearer than your filing system." Uncomfortable chuckles spread across the room. I returned to my seat, the bitter taste of champagne lingering on my tongue. As executives filtered out after the meeting, my father cornered me in the hallway. "That was inappropriate," he hissed, keeping his voice low. "You're supposed to be the steady one, the example." "Like the example you set?" I shot back. "Handing the company I built to someone who couldn't explain our core architecture if her life depended on it?" "Sophie has vision, charisma. She'll learn the technical details." "I doubled our government sector last year. I landed the Pentagon contract. You did your job," he cut me off. "But this company needs someone who can inspire, who can be the face of innovation. The market responds to personalities, not process improvements." The unspoken truth hung between us. I wasn't charismatic enough. Too introverted, too focused on substance over style, too much like him before he'd learned to perform for investors. "Is this because I wouldn't do the TechCrunch interview?" I asked. "Or because I questioned the Horizon acquisition?" "This is because I need to think about Meridian's future," he said with finality. "The decision's been made, Alex. Either support your sister or—" He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. I looked at my father then, really looked at him. The salt and pepper hair, the deep creases around his eyes, the familiar stubborn set of his jaw. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as my mentor and hero, but as a man whose ego had outgrown his judgment. "You're right," I said quietly. "We should all think about the future." My sudden calm seemed to surprise him, but he recovered, quickly, patting my shoulder awkwardly before heading back to the boardroom where Sophie was already holding court with our development team. I walked slowly back to my office, nodding mechanically at concerned looks from employees who'd already heard the news. My assistant, Priya, stood as I entered. "Is it true?" she asked, her expression a mixture of disbelief and indignation on my behalf. "Apparently," I said, closing my door. "Hold my calls, please, and see if you can move my lunch with Kevin from engineering to tomorrow." Once alone, I unlocked my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd prepared 3 months ago, around the time Sophie had started attending strategy meetings she'd previously found too boring. Inside was paperwork for a new company, Ascendant Systems, my insurance policy. I'd incorporated it after overhearing a conversation between my father and our largest investor. "Sophie has that special something," Dad had said. "The X factor that turns good companies into great ones. Alex is brilliant, but brilliance only gets you so far in today's market." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I'd called Marcus Wong, my old roommate from MIT and Meridian's original lead developer before Sophie's rebranding initiative had pushed him out. Marcus had gone on to build impressive security systems for several Silicon Valley giants. "How would you feel about getting the band back together?" I'd asked him. "But this time we control the music." Within a week, we'd secured initial funding from a venture capitalist who'd been trying to poach me from Meridian for years. Within a month, we'd leased modest office space in Bellevue, just far enough from Seattle to avoid raising suspicions. And within 3 months, we'd developed a prototype that solved the exact security challenges I knew Meridian's clients were facing, challenges Sophie had repeatedly dismissed as too niche to address. Now, staring at the cheap plaque my father had given me, "In appreciation for your service," I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus, "It's time. Execute Plan Ascendant." His response came seconds later. "Roger that, boss." They thought this was my end, my final chapter in the story of Meridian Technologies. But they didn't know about the servers running in Bellevue, about the meetings I'd had with our most valuable clients, about the team of top engineers I'd quietly recruited when Sophie's vision had alienated them. They thought this was my end. It was only my beginning. I spent the next 3 weeks playing the good soldier, nodding along in meetings while Sophie proposed increasingly unrealistic pivots and market disruptions. Each night I drove to Bellevue, where the real work happened. "The Pentagon wants a demo next week," Marcus told me as we reviewed Ascendant's security protocol. "They're concerned about Meridian's new direction." I wasn't surprised. The military values stability and reliability over moving fast and breaking things. Sophie's first official act as CEO had been to announce a company-wide reorganization focused on consumer applications, effectively deprioritizing the government contracts I'd spent years securing. "Are we ready?" I asked. "More than ready," Marcus grinned. "We've addressed the 0-day vulnerability their security team flagged last month, the one your sister said wasn't worth the development resources." I nodded, examining the elegant solution our team had developed. It wasn't just a patch, it was a comprehensive framework that anticipated future threats while maintaining backward compatibility. Exactly the kind of unsexy but critical innovation that had once been Meridian's hallmark. "Let's schedule the demo for Thursday," I decided. "And make sure Kevin's team has the documentation they need." Kevin Chen, no relation, had been Meridian's lead security architect until Sophie had reassigned him to the consumer apps division, a move he'd described as asking a heart surgeon to design Band-Aids. He'd joined Ascendant 2 days later, bringing 4 senior developers with him. By the time I returned to my apartment that night, it was nearly midnight. I was about to collapse. Into bed when my phone buzzed with a text from Priya. "Check your email, now." The message contained a forwarded calendar invitation to an emergency board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. The agenda had one item: Meridian Horizon merger discussion. Horizon Technologies, the overvalued startup my father had been flirting with for months, the one I'd argued against acquiring because their technology was fundamentally flawed and their financials highly suspect. Sophie had obviously overruled my objections. I called Priya immediately. "What's happening?" "Sophie announced the Horizon acquisition after you left," she said, her voice tense. "They're not just buying the technology. Meridian is merging with them. Jacob Reeves will be co-CEO with Sophie." Jacob Reeves, Horizon's founder, was a charismatic serial entrepreneur with a gift for storytelling and a history of selling companies just before their fundamental problems became apparent. I'd met him twice and walked away with the same impression. Both times, brilliant salesman, mediocre technologist, questionable ethics. "How are they financing this?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "They're leveraging everything," Priya confirmed. "The Seattle headquarters, the patent portfolio, Even the government contracts. My stomach tightened. What's the market's reaction? Stocks down 15% in after-hours trading. The enterprise clients are panicking, especially after Sophie's consumer pivot announcement last week. And the board? Split. The venture capital reps love the bold vision. The old guard is nervous but won't stand against your father. I thanked Priya and sat in the dark of my apartment, thinking. The merger would be a disaster. Horizon's technology didn't scale, their security was Swiss cheese, and their corporate culture was toxic. But more importantly, leveraging our government contracts as collateral was not just risky. It potentially violated several provisions I'd personally negotiated. I picked up my phone again and sent a text to our Pentagon contact, General Martinez. Need to discuss Meridian's situation urgently. Available tomorrow? His response was immediate. Concerns already raised on our end. Breakfast at the usual place, 7 a.m. The following morning, I met General Martinez at a quiet diner halfway between Seattle and the military installation where he was based. He looked grave as I slid into the booth across from him. "You've put me in a difficult position, Alex," he said without preamble. "Your company's instability threatens national security infrastructure." "It's not my company anymore," I replied. "Not really. Nevertheless, we've invested millions in systems that depend on Meridian's protocols. This consumer pivot and merger with a company that has known security vulnerabilities." He shook his head. "The Pentagon is preparing to invoke the stability clause in our contract." The stability clause, my insurance policy within Meridian. I'd insisted on language that would trigger massive penalties if the company made significant changes that might compromise security protocols. My father had agreed, never imagining he'd want to make such changes. "I understand," I said carefully. "But what if I could offer an alternative solution? Same protocols, same team, better security, different company." The general raised an eyebrow. "You have my attention." 2 hours later, I walked into Meridian's boardroom, precisely 3 minutes before the emergency meeting was scheduled to begin. My father and Sophie sat at the head of the table, with Jacob Reeves beside them, looking like a Silicon Valley central casting executive in his casual blazer and designer jeans. "Alex," my father nodded formally, "we were just discussing the transition timeline." "Exciting times," Jacob said, extending his hand. "Sophie tells me you'll be crucial in maintaining operational continuity while we integrate the teams." I shook his hand briefly. "Actually, I wanted to address the board about some concerns before we proceed." Sophie frowned. "We've already discussed the merger parameters, Alex. This meeting is about implementation. I think the board should hear this," I insisted, making eye contact with our longest-serving director, a former tech executive who'd backed my father's original startup. "Let him speak," the director said. I placed a folder on the table. "The Horizon merger violates the stability clause in our Pentagon contract. I've confirmed this with General Martinez this morning. Proceeding would trigger penalties of approximately $40 million. The room went silent. My father's face darkened. "Furthermore," I continued, "leveraging our government contracts as collateral without prior authorization from the relevant agencies violates Federal Acquisition Regulation 52.23223. The penalties for that would be additional and potentially criminal." Jacob's casual demeanor evaporated. "This is clearly a negotiating tactic," he said dismissively. "These regulations have workarounds." "Not these," I replied calmly. "I wrote the original contracts, structured specifically to prevent exactly this kind of instability." I turned to the board members. "There's more. Horizon's security architecture failed 3 independent audits last year. Merging their systems with ours would compromise our entire infrastructure, including systems currently protecting sensitive government data." Sophie stood up, her face flushed. "This is ridiculous. Alex is just bitter about the succession decision. The merger is going forward." Actually, I said, it isn't. I slid another document across the table. This is a letter from General Martinez informing Meridian that in light of the announced strategic changes, the Pentagon is exercising its right to terminate our contract for convenience and immediately awarding a new contract to Ascendant Systems, which has demonstrated superior security protocols and stability. My father snatched the letter. What is Ascendant Systems? My company, I said simply. The one I started 3 months ago when I overheard you telling investors that Sophie had the X factor the company needed. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Jacob Reeves was on his phone immediately, likely calling his lawyers. Board members were talking over each other, demanding explanations. Through it all, my father stared at me with a mixture of shock and something else. Was it respect? You can't do this, Sophie said, her voice breaking. We're family. Family, I echoed. Was it family when you and Dad planned my professional demotion for months behind my back? Was it family when you dismissed the work I've dedicated my life to as boring and uncreative? I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. The Pentagon contract represents 40% of Meridian's recurring revenue. Without it, the Horizon merger collapses. Your stock price will likely drop another 30% by market close. You've destroyed this company, my father said quietly. Everything I built. Everything we built, I corrected him. And I didn't destroy anything. You and Sophie did that when you decided flash was more valuable than substance. I'm just refusing to go down with the ship. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. Ascendant has already extended job offers to 32 key Meridian employees. They've all accepted, effective immediately. As I walked out of Meridian Technologies for the last time, my phone buzzed continuously with messages from shocked colleagues and panicked investors. I ignored them all, focusing, instead on the future I was building rather than the past I was leaving behind. 3 weeks later, Ascendant Systems officially opened its headquarters in a renovated warehouse in Georgetown, just south of downtown Seattle. We'd grown from a stealth team of 8 to a company of 50, with plans to double that within 6 months. The Pentagon contract had been just the beginning. Once word got out about our security protocol, other government agencies and security-conscious private companies had come calling. I was reviewing our latest hires paperwork when Priya, now my chief of staff, announced an unexpected visitor. Your father's here, she said cautiously. Should I send him away? I considered it. We hadn't spoken since the boardroom confrontation. Meridian stock had indeed plummeted, the Horizon merger had collapsed, and Sophie had been forced to lay off 30% of the staff. No, I decided. Send him in. Richard Chen looked older than he had a month ago. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weariness that made him seem diminished somehow. Nice space, he said, looking around at our open-concept office. Reminds me of our first real headquarters before we moved downtown. I nodded but said nothing, waiting. Meridian's filing for Chapter 11 next week, he continued. The board forced Sophie to step down. They've asked me to return as interim CEO while they look for a buyer. I'm sorry it came to that, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, seeing my father's life's work crumble gave me no pleasure. Are you? He asked, studying my face. You could have warned us about the Pentagon contract, given us a chance to adjust course. Like you warned me about choosing Sophie as CEO? He had the grace to look away. I made a mistake. I thought... He trailed off. You thought charisma would trump competence, I finished for him. You thought Sophie's ability to charm investors was more valuable than my ability to build sustainable systems. I thought you'd always be there, he admitted quietly. The reliable one. The rock. I took you for granted. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 decades of family history and business entanglement between us. What will you do now? I finally asked. After the bankruptcy? He shrugged. Retire, probably. Your mother's been asking me to slow down for years. He hesitated. Sophie's talking about starting a marketing consultancy. She's asking for my help. Of course she was. The pattern would continue. Sophie jumping to the next shiny opportunity, my father enabling her, neither learning from their mistakes. And what about you? He asked. Ascendant seems to be growing fast. We're selective, I replied. Quality over quantity, substance over flash. He nodded, understanding the implicit criticism. You always were the better businessman, he admitted. I just couldn't see it because you did it so differently than I would have. Another silence stretched between us. I didn't come here to ask for a job, he said finally. But I did come to ask if someday, when the dust settles, we might find a way to be family again. Just family, no business involved. I thought about all the years I'd sought his approval, all the nights I'd worked late trying to earn the recognition he gave Sophie so freely. I thought about the betrayal I'd felt in that boardroom and the satisfaction of finally being proven right. But I also thought about the father who'd taught me to code when I was 12, who'd believed in my abilities enough to let me rebuild his struggling company, who'd given me the foundation for everything I now knew. We'll always be family, I said finally. That's not something either of us can change, even if we wanted to. But it will take time. He nodded, accepting this partial olive branch. Time I have now, apparently. As he stood to leave, he paused by my desk. You know, in some strange way, I'm proud of you. What you did, starting Ascendant, securing the Pentagon contract. It was brilliant, ruthless, but brilliant. I learned from watching you, I replied. A sad smile crossed his face. Apparently too well. He extended his hand. Good luck, Alex. Build something better than I did. After he left, I stood at our office window, looking out at the Seattle skyline where Meridian's logo had once dominated. The company I'd helped build was falling, but from its ashes, something new was rising. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Pentagon just doubled their order. We need to hire more security specialists ASAP. I texted back, approved, quality candidates only. Then I turned away from the window and back to the future I was creating. Not from revenge, but from the simple desire to build something that valued substance over style, competence over charisma, and integrity over image. Sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't destruction. It's creation. 4 months before my professional execution at that boardroom gathering, I sat in my office late one evening, reviewing our quarterly forecasts. The Seattle rain tapped against my windows as I scrolled through financial projections that told a story few others could read. Numbers never lied, unlike people, and these particular numbers were screaming a warning I could no longer ignore. My office door opened without a knock. Elena Vasquez, our brilliant chief technology officer, slipped in and closed it quietly behind her. She'd been with Meridian almost as long as I had, joining us fresh out of Stanford when we were still working from that converted warehouse in Georgetown. You're still here, she observed, dropping into the chair across from my desk. Thought I was the only one burning midnight oil. Just reviewing the leadership transition spreadsheet, I said, turning my monitor slightly so she could see. Notice anything interesting? Elena leaned forward, her brow furrowing as she scanned the document. Her eyes widened when she reached the executive restructuring section where Sophie's name was already listed as CEO designate, with a transition date set for next quarter. This can't be right, she said, straightening up. Your father hasn't announced anything about stepping down, and you're the obvious successor. Apparently not so obvious to him, I replied, closing the document. I found this buried in the strategic planning folder. They've been planning this for months. How long have you known? Elena asked quietly. I sighed, leaning back in my chair. That my father would never fully trust someone who resembles his earlier self, more comfortable with systems than socializing. Probably since I was 15. When he hired a communication coach for me while telling Sophie her natural charisma was her greatest asset. What are you going to do? I reached into my desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope, sliding it across to her. Elena opened it. Carefully, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. Quantum Edge, she read aloud. Incorporation papers dated 3 weeks ago. She looked up sharply. You started another company? I'm preparing for the inevitable, I corrected. The quantum security architecture we discussed last year, the one my father and Sophie dismissed, as too experimental? The framework that would have revolutionized our entire security platform. Elena nodded, her eyes lighting up with the memory of the technical challenge. The one that would have put us 5 years ahead of every competitor. I've been developing it nights and weekends, I said. The prototype is ready for testing. Elena studied me for a long moment. And you want me to... Join me, I said. Simply. Be my CTO at Quantum Edge when the time comes. She glanced down at the papers again. Your father trusts me. I could stay, feed you information while you build this in the background. No, I shook my head firmly. I need you visible. Legitimate. They'll never connect us if you leave Meridian properly to join what appears to be a promising startup. A soft knock interrupted us. Rachel Kim, our legal director, entered without waiting for a response. The contracts are ready, she announced, placing a thick folder on my desk. Non-compete waivers for key personnel, structured as independent, contracts to bypass the standard agreements. Elena raised an eyebrow. Rachel's in on this too? Someone has to make sure we don't end up in court, Rachel replied, her precisely manicured nails tapping against the folder. Besides, I haven't forgotten how Sophie restructured my department last year to make room for her sorority sister with the online law degree. I opened the folder, scanning the documents. These look thorough. What about our IP protection? The quantum architecture is clean, Rachel confirmed. You developed it independently, using your own resources, and Meridian explicitly declined to pursue it. I've documented everything, including the board minutes where your father called it unnecessary theoretical work. I picked up a pen, its weight suddenly significant. Once I sign these, there's no going back. There's no going. Back anyway, Elena said softly. You know that. I did know. I'd known it definitively 3 weeks ago when I'd accidentally accessed an email thread between my father and 2 board members discussing Sophie's natural leadership presence, while describing my contributions as technically valuable but lacking executive presence. The pen moved across the signature line with deliberate strokes. It's done, I said, pushing the contracts toward Rachel. Make it happen. The following afternoon, I sat through yet another executive committee meeting, watching my sister present. Her latest initiative, a consumer app strategy that would divert resources from our core enterprise business to chase retail customers we had neither the infrastructure nor expertise to support. Alex, my father's voice interrupted my thoughts. You're unusually quiet today. What do you think of Sophie's consumer strategy? I offered the practiced smile I'd perfected over years of watching less competent people take credit for my innovations. It's certainly ambitious. But have we considered the security implications? Consumer applications require entirely different protocols than our enterprise systems. Always with the technical objections, Sophie laughed lightly. Sometimes you need to think beyond server architecture, Alex. Take some risks. Speaking of risks, I replied evenly. Have we secured the quantum encryption capability this strategy would require? Consumer data protection falls under much stricter regulatory frameworks now. Sophie's confident smile faltered slightly. Well, we have our existing security protocols, which were designed for enterprise clients behind corporate firewalls, I pointed out. Consumer-grade security is an entirely different challenge, one that requires quantum-resistant encryption. We'll develop that capability as we go, my father interjected smoothly. I gathered my tablet, standing to leave. Actually, I heard a new player in the security space has already patented a breakthrough quantum architecture. Quantum Edge, I believe they're called. The room grew quiet. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm sure we can partner with them if necessary, he said firmly. I nodded, heading for the door. I'm sure someone will try. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the Pentagon team about their system upgrade. As I walked out, I heard Sophie ask, "Who runs this Quantum Edge anyway?" I paused at the threshold, not turning back. I'm sure we'll all find out soon enough. Back in my office, I messaged Elena. Accelerate timeline. 3 months just became. One hour, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dinner with your father and Sophie tonight? They want to discuss some exciting news. I typed back. Can't. Working late on the Pentagon security upgrade. Someone has to make sure it actually works. Setting my phone aside, I pulled up the Quantum Edge business plan. The familiar determination rose in my chest as I remembered all the times I'd been told to be patient, to wait my turn, to support the company vision while my own ideas were dismissed as too technical or lacking market appeal. I was done waiting, done supporting, done being the reliable son who solved problems while others took the spotlight. They wanted me to know my place. I was about to show them exactly where that was. The next 4 weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation and pretense. By day, I attended Meridian meetings, nodding agreeably as Sophie unveiled increasingly problematic strategies. By night, I built Quantum Edge's infrastructure and recruited a select team of brilliant minds who had been overlooked or undervalued at Meridian. Our first major target was the Pentagon contract renewal, a $40 million deal that represented nearly a third of Meridian's stable revenue. The military had been increasingly concerned about quantum computing threats to their encryption standards, something my father had repeatedly downplayed as years away from practical relevance. General Rivera is requesting a meeting, my assistant informed me one morning. He says it's urgent, regarding the security protocols for the Aegis system. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, I replied, and make sure Sophie isn't aware of it. She'll only complicate matters. The following day, I met with General Rivera at a secure facility outside the city. The general had been my main contact at the Pentagon for years, a no-nonsense career military officer who valued competence over charisma and results over relationships. "You've put me in an awkward position, Alex," he said without preamble after we were seated in a windowless conference room. "Your company seems to be shifting priorities, based on the last quarterly briefing." "Not my decision," I replied carefully. He nodded, unsurprised. "The consumer pivot concerns us. Military systems require specialized focus, not divided attention." "I understand completely." "Your sister's presentation last month showed a 40% resource reallocation away from security infrastructure development." He frowned. "That's unacceptable for our needs." I leaned forward. "What if I told you there's an alternative? A quantum-resistant security architecture that exceeds current requirements and anticipates future threats?" The general's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "I'd say that sounds like exactly what we've been requesting from Meridian for the past 18 months. "Not from Meridian," I clarified. "From Quantum Edge." I slid a tablet across the table, displaying our security framework. The general studied it carefully, occasionally zooming in on technical specifications. After several minutes, he looked up. "This is what we asked your father for 2 budget cycles ago. He said it wasn't technically feasible yet." "He was wrong," I said simply. "And Quantum Edge can deliver this within our timeline?" "We already have. The prototype is running in our test environment. We can deploy to your systems within 30 days. The general considered this information, his military discipline not quite hiding his excitement at the breakthrough. "This would require breaking our existing contract with Meridian." "Actually," I replied, "the contract includes a technology advancement clause. If a superior security solution becomes available that significantly reduces vulnerability, The Pentagon can transition with minimal penalties. A clause you insisted on, as I recall, the general said with the faintest hint of a smile. Over your father's objections. I nodded. I believe in preparing for all contingencies. And who exactly runs Quantum Edge, Alex? Our eyes met across the table. I think you already know the answer to that, General. 3 days later, I received a message from Elena. Sophie just came out of your father's office looking like she's seen a ghost. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. I replied, right on schedule. That evening, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, listening to his message later. Alex, we need to talk before tomorrow's meeting. The Pentagon contract is at risk. Call me immediately. I didn't call back. The next morning, I arrived at the boardroom exactly on time, taking my usual seat as the other executives filed in looking tense and confused. My father entered last, Sophie at his side. Her usual confident smile was nowhere to be seen. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, my father began, his voice grave. We've received concerning news from the Pentagon. They're invoking the technology advancement clause in our contract and transitioning their security systems to another provider. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Pentagon contract was Meridian's most prestigious and stable source of revenue. What provider? Asked our CFO, Derek. Oracle? Microsoft? A company called Quantum Edge, Sophie replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. Apparently, they've developed a quantum-resistant security architecture that makes our systems obsolete. All eyes turned to me. I met my father's gaze steadily. Alex, he said quietly, what do you know about this? I took my time answering, arranging my tablet and water glass precisely. I know that I proposed a quantum security framework to this board 18 months ago. I know that it was dismissed as unnecessarily forward-looking and diverting resources from marketable features. And I know that Quantum Edge has successfully built what Meridian refused to prioritize. You're behind this, Sophie accused, her composure cracking. You've been working with them. I smiled slightly. Not with them, Sophie. I am them. The silence that followed was absolute. You incorporated a competing company? My father finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I created a solution to a critical security challenge, I corrected. One that Meridian, under your leadership, repeatedly refused to address. While working as our COO, he growled. That's a breach of your fiduciary duty. Actually, I replied, Rachel prepared a comprehensive legal opinion confirming that all development occurred on my own time, using my own resources, after Meridian explicitly declined to pursue the technology. I placed a document on the table. She was quite thorough in documenting the board's rejection of the quantum security initiative. Rachel is our legal director, Sophie snapped. She works for Meridian. Actually, she resigned last week, I corrected, as did Elena Vasquez, and 17 other key technical staff. They now work for Quantum Edge. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You've been planning this for months. I've been preparing for the inevitable, I countered, just as you and Sophie have been planning my professional demotion for months. Sophie flinched slightly, confirming my accusation. The Pentagon contract represents 30% of our recurring revenue, Derek interrupted, looking pale. Without it, the consumer pivot is financially unsustainable. Perhaps Sophie's natural charisma can convince them to reconsider, I suggested mildly, echoing my father's words from that overheard conversation. You vindictive, Sophie began, but my father silenced her with a gesture. What do you want, Alex? He asked, his business negotiation voice replacing the parental tone. An equity stake in Quantum Edge for Meridian? A licensing arrangement? I stood up, straightening my jacket. Nothing. Quantum Edge doesn't need Meridian. In fact, as of this morning, we've secured commitments from 3 additional government agencies and 2 financial institutions. all current Meridian clients concerned about the company's shifting priorities. "You're destroying this family," Sophie said, her voice breaking slightly. "Family?" I echoed. "Was it family when you took credit for my Pentagon security strategy in the investor presentation last year? Was it family when Dad started excluding me from succession planning discussions? Was it family when you both decided I wasn't leadership material despite building Meridian's entire enterprise business?" Neither answered. "I've given 15 years to Meridian Technologies," I continued. "I transformed Dad's consulting shop into an enterprise security leader, and my reward was to be sidelined for someone whose main qualification is being better at cocktail party conversation." I gathered my things and walked to the door. "The quantum security architecture was always mine to develop. You just didn't value it, or me, enough to see its potential." My father found his voice as I reached the threshold. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcome back." I turned one last time. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. As I left Meridian Technologies for what I assumed would be the final time, I felt none of the satisfaction I'd anticipated. Just a hollow certainty that I'd done what was necessary, if not what was easy. The next 3 months passed in a whirlwind of development sprints, client presentations, and rapid expansion. Quantum Edge grew from our initial team of 20 to nearly 100 employees, many of them former Meridian staff who jumped ship as word spread about our quantum security breakthrough and Meridian's financial troubles. I rarely checked Meridian's stock price, but I couldn't avoid the headlines in the business press. Meridian Technologies loses key government contracts. Sophie Chen steps down as CEO after 3 months. Meridian announces layoffs amid strategic restructuring. Elena found me working late one evening, staring at financial projections for our next quarter. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was again, alone in my office long after normal business hours, surrounded by spreadsheets and technical documentation. "Some habits don't change," she observed, perching on the edge of my desk. "Still the hardest working person in the building." I rubbed my eyes, suddenly aware of my exhaustion. Someone has to make sure we don't make the same mistakes Meridian did. "Speaking of Meridian," Elena said carefully, "have you heard the latest?" I shook my head. I'd been deliberately avoiding news about my former company for the past 2 weeks. "They're looking for a buyer. Your father's back as interim CEO after Sophie's departure. The board forced him to abandon the consumer strategy and refocus on enterprise security." "Too little, too late," I muttered. "Maybe," Elena agreed. "But I also heard they've approached Westlake Ventures about emergency funding." I looked up sharply. Westlake was known for acquiring distressed tech companies, stripping their intellectual property, and discarding the remains. They'd destroy whatever was left of Meridian's culture and client relationships. "That would be a disaster for their clients," I said. "The Pentagon systems alone would take years to transition fully to new providers." Elena watched me carefully. "You still care about those systems, about the work you built there." Before I could respond, my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in months. My father. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but finally answered on the 4th ring. "Alex Chen." "Alex." My father's voice sounded tired, older. "I need to meet with you. It's important." "I'm not interested in recriminations," I replied coolly. "This isn't about the past," he insisted. "It's about preventing a catastrophe for thousands of users who depend on systems you helped build. Please, 1 hour of your time." After a long pause, I agreed to meet him the following morning at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between Quantum Edge's offices and Meridian's downtown headquarters. When I arrived, my father was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of untouched coffee. He'd aged visibly in the 3 months since our boardroom confrontation. The confident posture was gone, replaced by the slightly hunched shoulders of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. You mentioned a potential catastrophe, I replied, skipping the pleasantries. I'm listening. He pushed a folder across the table. Westlake's acquisition offer. I thought you should see the terms. I opened it, scanning the document quickly. My stomach tightened as I read the post-acquisition plans. Westlake intended to dismantle Meridian entirely, selling off the commercial business in pieces, extracting the intellectual property, and abandoning the government contracts with minimal transition support. This would leave critical systems vulnerable during rushed migrations, I noted. The national security implications alone are disastrous, my father finished. I know. That's why I'm here. I closed the folder. What do you expect me to do about it? Meridian made its choices. No, I made those choices, he corrected, meeting my eyes directly. Sophie has resigned completely and moved to Los Angeles to start some kind of social media company. The board has given me 2 weeks to find an alternative to Westlake. And you want Quantum Edge to be that alternative, I concluded. He nodded, slowly. You built most of Meridian's core systems. You understand them better than anyone. You could integrate them with your quantum architecture with minimal disruption. Why would I want to take on Meridian's problems? We're growing exponentially without that baggage. My father was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. When he looked up, the business negotiator was gone, replaced by something I rarely saw: simple honesty. Because despite everything, you care about the work, about the systems you built and the people who depend on them. He leaned forward. And because I'm asking you, not as a businessman, but as your father, to help me fix my mistake. Which mistake would that be? I asked, my voice sharper than intended. Sidelining me for Sophie? Dismissing the quantum architecture? Or just fundamentally misunderstanding what kind of company Meridian needed to be? All of them, he said simply. I was wrong, Alex. About the company's direction, about Sophie's readiness for leadership, and most of all, about you. I sat back, surprised by his bluntness. My father rarely admitted error, even when the evidence was overwhelming. I thought leadership required a certain type of personality, he continued. Someone like me in my prime, or how I remember myself. Anyway, charismatic, bold, comfortable in the spotlight. Sophie seemed to have those qualities. While I was too technical, too detail-oriented, too introverted, I supplied. He nodded. I couldn't see that the industry had changed. That modern enterprise security requires exactly your kind of leadership. Methodical, thorough, focused, on substance over style. The admission should have felt vindicating. Instead, it just underscored the waste of time, opportunity, and relationship. Quantum Edge is not interested in acquiring Meridian, I said finally. The corporate culture clash alone would be unmanageable. His shoulders slumped slightly. However, I continued, we might consider a targeted acquisition of specific assets and contracts. The government division in particular aligns with our core business. Hope flickered across his face. You'd take on the Pentagon contracts? The classified systems? With appropriate due diligence and valuation, I qualified. We're not offering a bailout, but a strategic integration of compatible elements. And the Meridian name? The legacy? I considered this. The Meridian brand had been synonymous with reliable security for over a decade, a reputation I had largely built. The government division could retain the Meridian identity as a subsidiary of Quantum Edge, I offered. A separate business unit focusing on existing government contracts while transitioning to our quantum architecture. My father nodded slowly. And the commercial business? The enterprise clients? Would need to be evaluated individually. Some might fit our model, others won't. And my role in all this? He asked quietly. This was the crux of it, the question beneath the question. Could we work together again after everything that had happened? Meridian Government Solutions would need an experienced advisor during the transition, I said, carefully. Someone who understands the history and client relationships. A 6-month consulting arrangement might be appropriate. It wasn't the leadership role he was accustomed to, but it was something. A way for him to exit with dignity rather than presiding over Meridian's complete dismantling. I'd like to have Elena and our financial team review Meridian's current state before we formalize anything, I added. Complete transparency will be required. Of course, he agreed quickly. Whatever you need. As we finalized the preliminary details, I realized something had shifted between us. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Now I was the one evaluating his company's worth, determining its fate, deciding his professional future. Yet it brought none of the satisfaction I had once imagined. Just the sober recognition of responsibility. To employees who had done nothing wrong, to clients who depended on our systems, and to the legacy of innovation that preceded our personal conflict. When we parted outside the coffee shop, my father extended his hand formally. I hesitated only briefly before shaking it. I know this isn't forgiveness, he said quietly. But is it perhaps a beginning? I didn't have an answer for him then. The wound was still too fresh, the trust too thoroughly broken. It's a business decision, I replied instead. One that makes sense for Quantum Edge and for national security infrastructure. He nodded, accepting this limited olive branch. That's more than I had yesterday. As I watched him walk toward his car, his posture straighter now, some of the burden lifted, I wondered if business was truly all that remained between us. 15 years of working side by side, of building something remarkable together, couldn't be entirely erased by 3 months of conflict, no matter how bitter. Elena was waiting in my office when I returned to Quantum Edge. How did it go? She asked, studying my expression. We're acquiring Meridian's government division, I replied, settling behind my desk. I need you to lead the technical due diligence team. She raised an eyebrow. Not what I expected. I thought you were done with Meridian for good. I'm done with what Meridian had become, I clarified. But the systems we built, the clients who depend on them, they deserve better than a hasty transition to inferior security under Westlake's ownership. Elena nodded slowly. And your father? Is he part of this acquisition? 6-month consulting arrangement for the transition. Nothing more. And after that? I looked out my office window at the Seattle skyline, the future of Quantum Edge stretching before us bright with possibility. That depends on how well he accepts his new reality. The reality where his son, the one he'd dismissed as lacking leadership qualities, now led the most innovative security company in the industry, where his carefully built company existed only as a subsidiary of mine, where his professional legacy depended entirely on my decisions. You know, Elena said carefully, taking over parts of Meridian doesn't have to be just about business. It could also be about healing. I turned back from the window. I'm not interested in false reconciliations. Not false, she countered. Just evolved. You're not the same people you were when this started. Neither of you. I considered her words as I reviewed the preliminary acquisition documents. She wasn't wrong. The Alex who had sat in that boardroom watching Sophie's promotion would never have imagined running his own successful company 3 months later. And my father, humbled by failure and forced to acknowledge his mistakes, was not the same man who had so casually dismissed my contributions. Perhaps there was something to build there, not the old relationship of unmet expectations and quiet resentment, but something new. Something based on professional respect rather than family obligation. The next morning, I called my father with our initial terms for the Meridian acquisition. The conversation was strictly business, valuations, integration timelines, employee transitions. But at the very end, almost as an afterthought, I added, Mom mentioned she's been wanting you to take her to that cooking class series at Bellevue Community College. The 6-month consulting role should leave you time for that now. A brief silence, then. She'd like that. Maybe you could join us sometime if you're not too busy running the security industry. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But perhaps it was, as he had suggested, a beginning. The acquisition of Meridian's government division progressed with methodical precision over the next 6 weeks. My team conducted thorough due diligence, uncovering both concerning liabilities and unexpected assets. The Pentagon contracts were even more valuable than we had initially estimated, with renewal options that could triple their value over the next 5 years. The technical integration challenges were substantial but manageable, a complex puzzle that energized our engineering teams rather than daunting them. I maintained a carefully professional distance throughout the process, delegating most direct interactions with Meridian's executives to Elena and our CFO, Michael Wong. My father attended key meetings with military clients, providing context and continuity, but otherwise remained in the background. A strange reversal for someone who had dominated every room for decades. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Elena found me in our test lab, reviewing the quantum encryption implementation for a classified communications system. Phase 1 integration plan is complete, she announced, dropping a tablet on the workbench beside me. We can begin migrating the Aegis platform next week. I nodded, scanning the migration timeline. Have you briefed General Rivera? Yesterday. He's relieved we're preserving the core functionality while enhancing the security protocols. She hesitated. He asked about you, actually. Wanted to know why you weren't at the briefing. I adjusted a parameter in the encryption algorithm, watching the simulation results recalculate. I'm more valuable optimizing the technical implementation than making small talk with generals. Elena leaned against the workbench, studying me, with the frank assessment of someone who had known me for over a decade. That's not why you're avoiding the client meetings. I looked up, meeting her gaze. I'm not avoiding anything. I'm focusing on my strengths. You're avoiding situations where you might encounter your father in a professional context, she corrected gently, the same way you've been skipping the integration team meetings when he's scheduled to attend. I returned my attention to the simulation results. My presence would complicate things unnecessarily. He's actually been quite helpful, Elena noted. His historical knowledge of the systems has accelerated our mapping process significantly. And he's been, she searched for the right word, humble, not a quality I previously associated with Richard Chen. I made a non-committal sound, adjusting another parameter. The Meridian employees are asking questions, she continued. They know you built most of the systems they maintain. They're wondering why the founder's son, the technical architect of their entire platform, isn't involved in the transition. We're maintaining appropriate corporate separation during the acquisition. It's cleaner that way. Elena sighed. You can't avoid him forever, Alex. At some point, you'll need to find a way forward that isn't defined by what happened. I finally looked up from my work. I'm building a quantum-resistant security architecture that will protect critical national infrastructure for the next decade. That's my way forward. Professionally, sure, she acknowledged. But personally, you're still operating from a place of anger and vindication. Before I could formulate a response that wasn't pure denial, my phone buzzed with a text from our head of security. Your mother is in reception, says she needs to see you. I frowned. My mother rarely visited me at work, and never without calling first. I need to go, I told Elena, already heading for the door. We'll continue this discussion later. I found my mother waiting in our reception area, looking strikingly out of place amid Quantum Edge's ultra-modern aesthetic. Julia Chen had always been the calm counterpoint to my father's ambition, the steady presence who managed our home while he built his business, and I built my technical expertise. Mom, I greeted her with a quick hug. Is everything okay? You didn't call first. I was in the neighborhood, she said with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I led her to my office, closing the door behind us. She took in the space with a mother's assessing gaze, noting the minimal decoration, the 3 monitors displaying code and financial projections, the couch that showed signs of too many nights spent working instead of going home. "You're working too hard," she observed, touching a coffee mug that held pens instead of beverages. "Just like your father used to." The comparison stung more than it should have. "I'm running a company during a major acquisition. It requires attention." She nodded, settling into the chair across from my desk. "That's actually why I'm here. This acquisition, taking over parts of Meridian, it's bringing up a lot for your father." I maintained a neutral expression. "The transition consulting agreement is time-limited. 6 months, then we can all move forward separately." "Is that what you want?" she asked directly. "To move forward separately? To permanently sever your relationship with your father over a business decision?" "He didn't just make a business decision, Mom. He systematically undermined me for years, then handed the company I built to Sophie because she reminds him of himself. Then he acted surprised when I refused to stay and keep the machinery running. Well, she drove it off a cliff." My mother's expression remained calm, but her eyes reflected a deep sadness. "I'm not defending his choices, Alex. But I am asking you to consider whether permanent estrangement is the outcome you really want." I swiveled in my chair, looking out at the Seattle skyline. What I wanted was for him to see my value, to recognize that I was building something extraordinary at Meridian. Instead, he saw only what I lacked: his charisma, his easy charm with investors, his comfort in the spotlight. "He sees it now," she said quietly. "Far too late, with far too much damage done, but he does see it." I turned back to her. "Because I forced his hand. Because I built something he couldn't ignore or dismiss." "Yes," she agreed. "And that was necessary, both for him to recognize his mistake and for you to step fully into your own capabilities. But what comes next doesn't have to be defined by that conflict." "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Have dinner with us," she said simply. "Not a business meeting, not a negotiation, just a family dinner." "With Sophie, too?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Sophie's in Los Angeles. Something about a social media consultancy." She waved a hand dismissively. "Just you, me, and your father, and your—" I was silent for a long moment, weighing the request against my still raw feelings. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to maintain the clean separation between my new life and the family dynamics that had constrained me for so long. But another part recognized the cost of that separation, not just to my parents but to myself. "One dinner," I finally agreed, "but not at the house. Somewhere neutral." Relief softened her features. "There's that new place on Lake Union you mentioned wanting to try last year, with the molecular gastronomy menu." The fact that she remembered this small detail, a restaurant I'd mentioned in passing months ago, reminded me that while my father had often failed to see me clearly, my mother rarely had. "Thursday at 7, I decided. "I'll make the reservation." She stood, gathering her purse. "Thank you, Alex. This means more than you know." After she left, I sat staring at my computer screens without really seeing them. Elena's words echoed in my mind. "You're still operating from a place of anger and vindication." She wasn't wrong. Despite Quantum Edge's success, despite the acquisition that proved my technical vision had been right all along, I was still defining myself in opposition to my father's dismissal. Was that sustainable? More importantly, was it what I wanted for the next decade of my life? Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable clarity, the persistent Seattle clouds parting to reveal a spectacular sunset over Lake Union. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse, its glass walls offering panoramic views of the water and the city beyond. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit formed through years of preparing for every contingency. My parents arrived precisely on time, my father looking uncomfortable in casual attire after decades of business suits. My mother had clearly put effort into the evening, wearing a dress I'd given her last Christmas and the pearl earrings that had been her own mother's. The maitre d' led us to a corner table with particularly stunning views. An awkward moment followed as we settled into our seats and accepted menus, the weight of unspoken history making even these simple actions feel laden with significance. "The chef here trained at El Bulli," I offered, breaking the silence. "His deconstructed seafood dishes are supposed to be remarkable." "Your mother has been talking about this place for months," my father said, his voice carefully neutral. "Ever since you mentioned it." The conversation remained cautious through our appetizers, my mother carrying most of the weight with updates about family friends and community activities. My father spoke little, watching me with an intensity that would have felt invasive, if not for the uncertainty I detected beneath it. It wasn't until our main courses arrived that he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "The Pentagon implementation is proceeding well," he said, setting down his fork. "General Rivera speaks highly of your team's expertise." "We're on schedule and under budget," I confirmed, maintaining the professional distance that felt safest. "The security upgrades have exceeded initial performance projections." My mother shot us both a look. "This isn't a business dinner, remember?" My father nodded, looking momentarily chastened. He took a sip of water, then tried again. "Your mother tells me you've been taking flying lessons." The personal nature of the question surprised me. "Just simulator training so far. It's a different kind of problem solving." "Your grandfather was a pilot," he noted, "before he started the hardware store." This was news to me. "You never mentioned that." A flicker of regret crossed his face. "There's a lot I should have mentioned over the years." The simple acknowledgement opened something between us, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a willingness to see beyond the recent conflict to the longer history we shared. "Why did you really choose Sophie?" I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider. Was it just about her communication style, or was there something fundamentally lacking in me? My mother tensed, but my father held up a hand gently. "It's a fair question," he told her before turning back to me. "It wasn't about what you lacked, Alex. It was about what I thought I needed to be, what I thought a CEO had to be. Charismatic, extroverted, comfortable in the spotlight," I supplied. "Yes," he acknowledged. "But more than that, I thought leadership meant being the person everyone pays attention to, the one who inspires through force of personality." I couldn't see that the industry had evolved beyond that model. Modern enterprise security requires methodical precision and technical depth, I noted, not inspirational speeches. "Exactly." He set his napkin aside, leaning forward slightly. I was applying leadership principles from 20 years ago to a technical landscape that had fundamentally changed, and I was too stubborn, too convinced of my own judgment to see it. The admission was more forthright than I had expected. For a moment, I glimpsed what this was costing him, the man who had built a company from nothing, who had never shown doubt or vulnerability, now acknowledging a catastrophic misjudgment to the son who had proven him wrong. "Sophie was never going to succeed in that role," he continued. "That's on me, not her. I set her up to fail by ignoring the actual requirements of modern security leadership." "And now?" I asked, curious despite myself. "What will you do after the consulting agreement ends?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm considering teaching." Seattle University has approached me about a business school position, sharing case studies from Meridian's growth and eventual challenges, including the succession planning failure. I couldn't resist asking. "Especially that," he said with unexpected candor. "It's a textbook example of how not to manage technology company leadership transition." For the first time in months, I felt something like respect for my father stirring beneath the layers of hurt and resentment. This humility, this willingness to transform his failure into a learning opportunity for others, showed a capacity for growth I hadn't believed he possessed. The conversation shifted to lighter topics through dessert, and when we parted outside, the restaurant The Goodbye was warmer than I had anticipated. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you," against my shoulder. My father extended his hand, then hesitated before pulling me into a brief, somewhat awkward embrace. "I'm proud of what you're building," he said quietly. "Not just the technology, but the kind of leader you've become. The kind I should have recognized sooner." The words hit me with unexpected force, the validation I had sought for so long, offered freely now that I no longer needed it to define my worth. I drove home with my thoughts churning, the evening replaying in my mind. The dinner had not erased the past, but it had perhaps created space for a different kind of future, one where my relationship with my father could evolve beyond the dynamics that had constrained us both. The next morning, I arrived at Quantum Edge earlier than usual, driven by a restless energy I couldn't quite name. Elena found me in the conference room, reviewing the integration timeline for the remaining Meridian systems. "You're here early," she observed. "How was the family dinner?" "Surprisingly productive," I admitted. "My father is changing, or at least trying to." "People can," she said, settling into the chair beside me, "when properly motivated. By catastrophic failure." "You mean?" I asked with a wry smile. "That's certainly one motivator." She studied the timeline displayed on the wall screen. "We're ahead of schedule on most of the critical systems. The Aegis migration has been particularly smooth. Because my father's technical documentation was more comprehensive than we expected," I acknowledged. "He may have made a disastrous leadership decision, but his systems architecture was always solid." Elena gave me a knowing look. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree in some respects." The observation would have irritated me months ago. Now I found I could separate the aspects of my father worth emulating: his technical thoroughness, his commitment to quality, his persistence, from those I had determined not to repeat. "We're still planning to move the classified communications hub next week?" I asked, redirecting to practical matters. "Yes, but there's a complication. The Pentagon wants both you and your father in the room for the transition briefing. General Rivera specifically requested it." I frowned. "Why both of us?" "Continuity and confidence," she explained. "Your father represents the historical knowledge of the systems. You represent the quantum security future. Together, you reassure them that nothing will be lost in transition." The request made logical sense, but the prospect of working directly with my father, of presenting a united front after everything that had happened, felt complicated in ways I wasn't sure I was ready to navigate. "I'll be there," I decided. After a moment. Professional interests have to take priority over personal history. The Pentagon briefing required extensive preparation. Despite my intimate knowledge of the systems involved, the classified nature of the communications hub demanded precise documentation of every transition step. I spent the weekend immersed in technical specifications and security protocols, leaving little time to dwell on the interpersonal dynamics awaiting me. Monday morning found me in the secure conference room at the Pentagon, arriving 30 minutes before the scheduled briefing to set up my presentation materials. I was reviewing my notes when my father entered, carrying a well-worn leather portfolio I recognized from countless Meridian meetings. "Alex," he greeted me with careful formality. "I reviewed your transition documentation. The quantum implementation is even more elegant than I anticipated. We've simplified the user authentication while strengthening the underlying encryption," I explained, somewhat surprised by his technical focus. "The system will feel familiar to operators while providing exponentially stronger protection." He nodded, setting his materials on the table. I took the liberty of preparing some historical context on the system evolution. The original architecture decisions might provide useful background. I accepted the folder he offered, scanning the neatly organized documentation. It was thorough and relevant, focusing precisely on the aspects of the system history that would matter for our presentation. This is helpful, I acknowledged. I'll incorporate key points into the technical overview. We worked side by side for the next 20 minutes, calibrating our presentations to provide a seamless narrative. The tension I had anticipated was present, but muted, overshadowed by the shared technical language that had always been our strongest connection. General Rivera arrived with his team precisely on schedule. The briefing proceeded with military efficiency, my father providing historical context and system background before I detailed the quantum security implementation and transition timeline. We fielded questions as a coordinated unit, each deferring to the other's expertise when appropriate. "Impressive work, gentlemen," the general concluded as we wrapped up. "The continuity you've maintained while advancing the security posture is exactly what we needed." As the military personnel filed out, I began gathering my materials. My father lingered, seemingly reluctant to end our unexpected collaboration. "We make a good team," he observed quietly. "Always did, when it came to the technical fundamentals." I paused, considering his words. The problems were never technical, between us. "No," he agreed. "They were about recognition, respect, and trust, all areas where I failed spectacularly." The blunt acknowledgement disarmed my practiced defenses. "You had a vision for Meridian that didn't include me at the helm. I've built a different vision with Quantum Edge." "A better one," he admitted. "More aligned with where security technology is actually heading." He closed his portfolio carefully. "I've been thinking about our consulting arrangement. It's working well from our perspective," I said, reverting to professional language. "Your historical knowledge has accelerated the transition timelines significantly." "I'd like to propose an adjustment," he continued. "Rather than completing the full 6 months in a general advisory capacity, I'd prefer to focus exclusively on documenting the evolutionary architecture of the systems, creating a comprehensive, technical history that your team can reference long-term." The suggestion surprised me. "That's significantly more technical and less visible than your current role." "Yes," he nodded, "but potentially more valuable to Quantum Edge's long-term success, and it plays to my actual strengths rather than my perceived ones." I considered the proposal, recognizing both its practical merit and its symbolic significance. My father was voluntarily stepping further back, removing himself from client interactions to focus on behind-the-scenes documentation work, reversing the spotlight-seeking behavior that had characterized his leadership for decades. "That makes sense," I agreed. "Elena can coordinate with you on the documentation priorities." "Thank you." He extended his hand, the gesture formally professional, but his eyes conveying something more complex. "Foreseeing the value in the history, even while you build the future." As we shook hands, I realized that this moment of professional respect and mutual recognition was perhaps the healthiest interaction we had shared in years. Not the forced harmony of family obligation, not the competitive tension of perceived rivalry, but the straightforward acknowledgement of complementary expertise. Back at Quantum Edge that afternoon, I found myself reflecting on the evolving nature of my relationship with my father as I reviewed system migration data. The wound of betrayal remained, but its edges were softening slightly, making space for a more nuanced understanding of the man who had shaped both my professional strengths and personal challenges. Elena interrupted my thoughts, appearing in my office doorway with an expression that immediately put me on alert. "We have a situation," she announced without preamble. "The Aegis platform migration revealed something unexpected in the core protocol." I straightened, instantly focused. "Security vulnerability?" "Not exactly." She placed a tablet on my desk, displaying a section of code I recognized immediately, because I had written it myself years ago at Meridian. It's a secondary authentication system, hidden beneath the primary protocols, one that isn't documented anywhere in the official specifications. I studied the code, memory surfacing of the weeks I'd spent developing this backup system during a particularly tense period of international cyber incidents. It's a failsafe, I explained. A secondary authentication pathway that activates only if the primary system is compromised. We developed it after the Chelyabinsk incident when we realized how vulnerable centralized authentication could be to state-level actors. That's what I thought. Elena nodded. But here's the interesting part. It's been activated 3 times in the past month, after Meridian's security team was downsized, but before our migration began. The implications were immediately concerning. Someone was attempting to compromise the primary authentication system during the transition uncertainty, and would have succeeded if not for your undocumented failsafe, she confirmed. A failsafe that not even your father knew about, based on his reaction when we found it. I leaned back, processing this information. We need to trace the intrusion attempts, identify the origin. Already working on it. But there's something else. Elena's expression grew more serious. The attempts appear to have originated from within Westlake Ventures' network. Westlake, the private equity firm that had been negotiating to acquire Meridian before our intervention. The firm known for stripping acquired companies of valuable intellectual property. They were trying to access the classified protocols before the acquisition was even finalized, I realized, planning to extract the security architecture for sale to third parties. It appears so, which means your decision to intervene didn't just save Meridian from dismantlement. It potentially prevented classified security protocols from being compromised, I finished. We need to inform General Rivera immediately. Already scheduled for tomorrow morning, Elena confirmed. But I thought you should know first, since it was your failsafe that detected the attempts. After she left, I sat contemplating this. New information. The hidden authentication system had been my independent initiative, developed without formal approval because I'd recognized a vulnerability that others, including my father, had dismissed as theoretical. At the time, it had felt like yet another example of my technical concerns being undervalued. Now, years later, that same unauthorized system had potentially prevented a serious security breach of national defense infrastructure. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. This discovery complicated my narrative about Meridian and my father's leadership. While his succession decision had been fundamentally flawed, the technical culture he had created had allowed me the freedom to implement unauthorized security measures based on my own judgment. Freedom I had used to create a failsafe that ultimately protected critical systems during a vulnerable transition. After a moment's consideration, I composed a text to my father. Need to discuss Aegis secondary authentication protocol. My office, 9 a.m. tomorrow? His response came quickly. I'll be there. Didn't know it existed, but not entirely surprised. You built it. The simple acknowledgement, recognition of both my initiative and his awareness of my tendencies, felt like another small step toward a new kind of understanding between us. Not the relationship we had before, certainly, but perhaps something more balanced, more honest, and ultimately more sustainable. As I prepared for the meeting with General Rivera the next day, I found myself considering Elena's earlier observation with new perspective. I had been operating from a place of anger and vindication, defining my success in opposition to my father's failure. But perhaps it was time to acknowledge that both our contributions had value, that both our approaches to security had merit, and that the strongest path forward might incorporate elements of both. The quantum future I was building at Quantum Edge would be stronger for including the architectural history my father had created, just as I, despite everything, was partly shaped by the lessons he had taught me, both through his successes and his failures. That realization didn't erase the past, but it did illuminate a different possible future. one where professional respect might eventually rebuild what personal disappointment had broken. The discovery of Westlake's attempted intrusion into the Pentagon systems elevated our concerns to a new level. What had begun as a corporate acquisition battle now carried national security implications. General Rivera arrived at Quantum Edge the following morning with a team of cybersecurity specialists from military intelligence. The atmosphere in our conference room was tense as I walked them through the hidden authentication protocol and the evidence of attempted breaches. 3 separate intrusion attempts, all originating from Westlake's network infrastructure, I explained, displaying the logs on the main screen. Each targeting different components of the classified communications protocol. And this secondary authentication system was your creation? General Rivera asked, examining the code architecture with a practiced eye. Yes, I implemented it 4 years ago at Meridian, after identifying vulnerabilities in the standard authentication approach. Without formal authorization, my father added from his seat at the far end of the table, which was both against company protocol and exactly the right decision, given what we know now. The general's eyebrows rose slightly at this unexpected support. And Westlake had no way of knowing about this failsafe? It wasn't documented in any official specifications, I confirmed. The code was embedded within the system architecture, in a way that made it virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Essentially, they thought they were accessing an unlock mechanism, but were actually triggering a silent alarm, Elena elaborated. Each attempt logged detailed information about the incursion pathway while appearing to process normally. One of the military intelligence specialists leaned forward. This goes beyond corporate espionage. Attempting to access classified defense systems carries serious federal implications, particularly given Westlake's known connections to certain international investment groups, General Rivera noted. This will require a full investigation at the highest levels. As the meeting concluded, the general pulled me aside. You may have prevented a significant breach, Mr. Chen. The DoD owes you a debt of gratitude. I was just doing my job, I responded automatically. No, he countered, his expression serious. You were exceeding your job description in exactly the way security demands. That's unfortunately rare. After the military team departed with copies of our evidence, I found myself alone in the conference room with my father. The silence between us felt different than it had in recent months, less charged with resentment, more weighted with mutual recognition. The secondary authentication system, he said finally. That was during the period when I rejected your proposal for comprehensive protocol redesign. I nodded, remembering the frustration of that time. You said it was unnecessarily paranoid, that existing authentication methods were sufficient. So you built it anyway, without authorization, he continued, because you believed it was necessary regardless of official opinion. The vulnerabilities were real, I replied simply, whether acknowledged or not. A slight smile crossed his face. That's what makes you a better security architect than I ever was. I built systems to match specifications. You built systems to match threats, including the ones others couldn't see yet. The acknowledgement stirred something complicated within me, a mixture of vindication and an unexpected sadness for all the years we might have worked in true collaboration, had he recognized this difference sooner. Why didn't you tell me about the failsafe? He asked. I considered the question seriously. Partly because you had explicitly rejected the concept, partly because security through obscurity works best when truly obscure. I paused. And partly because I was tired of fighting for recognition of threats you dismissed as theoretical. He nodded slowly, accepting this assessment without defensiveness. Fair on all counts. He gathered his notes, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, I sleep better knowing systems I helped build are now protected by security I didn't have the foresight to implement. There's a certain poetic justice in that. As he reached the door, he turned back. The project you authorized, the architectural history of Meridian systems. I'd like to include this failsafe and other undocumented security measures you may have implemented. Not for current operational purposes, but as a learning tool for future security architects. Examples of necessary innovation that occurred despite, rather than because of, management direction. The suggestion caught me off guard. My father, proposing to document not just Meridian's official development path, but also the ways in which I had circumvented it to implement stronger security. It represented an unexpected commitment to institutional honesty rather than corporate face-saving. That makes sense, I agreed. Elena can help identify other unofficial security enhancements that should be included. After he left, I remained in the conference room, contemplating the strange new territory we were navigating. Professional respect gradually emerging from the wreckage of personal disappointment. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but perhaps something equally valuable, recognition of our respective contributions to a shared technical legacy. The Westlake investigation expanded rapidly over the following weeks. Federal authorities seized servers and documents from the private equity firm's offices, revealing a pattern of intellectual property theft that extended far beyond their interest in Meridian. 3 executives were indicted on charges of attempted unauthorized access to classified systems, wire fraud, and corporate espionage. The business press, which had initially covered Meridian's downfall and Quantum Edge's rise as a simple succession drama, now reframed the narrative as a cybersecurity thriller with national security implications. Overnight, my reputation transformed from vindictive son who tanked his family's company to security visionary who prevented classified data theft. I found the sudden public rehabilitation more amusing than validating. The technical work remained the same regardless of media narrative, and I had long since stopped seeking external confirmation of my value. More significant was the accelerating integration of Meridian's government division into Quantum Edge's operations. With the Westlake threat neutralized and the security implications of our work more evident than ever, the Pentagon fast-tracked approval for our enhanced systems. What had been projected as an 18-month transition compressed to less than 6. Elena managed most of the integration work, allowing me to focus on next-generation quantum security protocols. My father's documentation project progressed, in parallel, creating a comprehensive architectural history that proved increasingly valuable as we migrated more complex systems. One Thursday afternoon, I was deep in coding when Priya knocked on my office door. "The Northwestern University team is here for their tour," she reminded me. "The Quantum Computing Research Partnership?" I glanced at the clock, surprised by how the day had passed. "Right. I'll meet them in the demonstration lab." The partnership with Northwestern's Quantum Computing Department represented an exciting expansion of our research capabilities. Their theoretical work complemented our practical implementation, focus, creating possibilities that neither could achieve alone. I found Professor Amara Singh and her team already examining our quantum simulation environment with obvious enthusiasm. Among them was a doctoral candidate whose intense focus on the security protocol documentation reminded me powerfully of my own early days in technology. "Dr. Chen," Professor Singh greeted me warmly, "your team has been giving us a fascinating overview of your implementation architecture. The practical applications you've developed for theoretical quantum resistance are remarkable." "Theory and practice need each other," I replied. "That's why this partnership makes so much sense for both our organizations." "Absolutely," she agreed. Though I must say we were surprised to learn that Richard Chen is involved in your documentation project. Given the complicated history there, news of my father's role had clearly spread through academic circles. "He provides invaluable historical context," I said simply. "Technical architectures evolve from what came before, even when making decisive breaks with past approaches." She nodded thoughtfully. "Like quantum computing itself, simultaneously a radical departure from classical computing and deeply dependent on its foundational principles." The comparison was apt in ways she couldn't fully appreciate. My work at Quantum Edge represented both a rejection of my father's leadership decisions and a continuation of his technical legacy, a paradox I was still learning to navigate. As I demonstrated our secure communications prototype, the doctoral student I'd noticed earlier asked a series of surprisingly insightful questions about our encryption implementation. Her grasp of both theoretical vulnerabilities and practical constraints indicated a rare combination of academic depth and real-world awareness. "You've considered the harvest now decrypt later threat model," she observed, examining our key rotation protocol. "Most implementations focus exclusively on current capabilities rather than future quantum decryption possibilities. Security architecture needs to anticipate threats that don't exist yet," I replied, "or at least create frameworks flexible enough to adapt when they emerge." "Exactly what I've been arguing in my dissertation," she said with unexpected intensity. "But it's challenging to find real-world examples that prioritize theoretical threats over immediate concerns." After the formal tour concluded, I found myself continuing the conversation with this student, Maya Patel, whose perspective on quantum security challenges aligned remarkably with my own early thinking at Meridian. "Your approach to threat modeling is exactly what the field needs," I told her as we discussed her research. "The ability to conceptualize security as an evolving system rather than a fixed implementation." "That's generous coming from you," she replied. "Your paper on anticipatory encryption strategies was what inspired me to focus on quantum security in the first place." The comment caught me off guard. "That paper was largely ignored when I published it. Too theoretical for practical application, according to most reviewers." "Sometimes it takes time for important ideas to be recognized," she said with a shrug. "Doesn't make them any less valuable in the interim." The observation struck an unexpected chord. How much of my conflict with my father had stemmed from precisely this dynamic, the frustration of developing concepts whose value wouldn't be fully recognized until years later? And how much of his recent change reflected the belated recognition of principles that had always been sound, if ahead of their time? As the Northwestern team prepared to leave, Professor Singh pulled me aside. "Maya's finishing her PhD this semester. She's exactly the kind of talent you should consider recruiting. Brilliant theoretical foundation with a strong practical orientation." "I was thinking the same thing," I admitted. "Her perspective on quantum threat modeling is exceptional." "Just between us," Singh lowered her voice slightly, "she's already fielded offers from Google's quantum division and a classified government research lab, but she's expressed particular interest in Quantum Edge's approach to security architecture." I made a mental note to discuss this with Elena. Attracting top doctoral talent like Maya would accelerate our research capabilities significantly. After the Northwestern team departed, I found myself reflecting on the parallels between Maya's current position and my own situation years earlier. A security theorist whose ideas were simultaneously respected and somewhat dismissed for being ahead of practical implementation. The difference was that Maya had found recognition from established figures in her field, while I had been forced to create my own company to validate my approach. That evening, I was reviewing Maya's published research when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Alex Chen," I answered. "Mr. Chen, this is Amanda Russell from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy." The unexpected contact immediately commanded my full attention. The OSTP served as the President's primary advisory body on scientific and technological matters. "I'm calling regarding the quantum security initiative being developed in response to recent national security concerns," she continued. "Your work at Quantum Edge, particularly following the Westlake incident, has come to our attention at the highest levels." "I appreciate that," I replied cautiously. "How can I help?" "We're assembling a small working group of industry leaders and security experts to develop national standards for quantum-resistant encryption implementation. Given your practical experience deploying such systems for defense infrastructure, the committee chair has specifically requested your participation." The invitation was significant, a chance to shape national policy on quantum security at a critical juncture in technological evolution. Yet I found myself hesitating, aware of the competing demands on my time as Quantum Edge continued its rapid growth. The initial meeting is scheduled for next month in Washington, Russell continued. It would involve a 2-year commitment with quarterly in-person sessions and monthly virtual meetings. That's a substantial time investment, I noted. I'd need to consider how to balance it with my operational responsibilities at Quantum Edge. Of course, though I should mention that Richard Chen has also been invited to provide historical context on enterprise security evolution. She paused. We understand there's some complexity there, but the committee chair believes both perspectives would be valuable. My father on the same advisory committee, working together at the national policy level after everything that had happened between us. The prospect would have been unthinkable just months ago. Can I get back to you tomorrow? I asked. I need to discuss this with my executive team. Certainly. Just to be clear, this is a significant opportunity to influence the national approach to quantum security standards. Your expertise would be invaluable to the process. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. The invitation represented exactly the kind of recognition I had once craved. Acknowledgement at the highest levels that my approach to quantum security was not merely theoretically sound, but practically essential. Yet my initial reaction wasn't the vindication I might have expected. Instead, I found myself considering the practical logistics of participating alongside my father in a multi-year policy development process. Could we set aside our personal history enough to contribute effectively to national security standards? And more importantly, should we even try? I called Elena, knowing her perspective would be both honest and insightful. The White House Quantum Security Committee? She repeated after I explained the situation. That's a significant opportunity, Alex. Quantum Edge would be helping shape the standards our entire industry will follow. Along with my father, I reminded her, for 2 years of regular collaboration. She was quiet for a moment. 6 months ago, that would have been impossible. But now? You've been working effectively on the Pentagon transition. The documentation project is going well. Maybe this is the next logical step in whatever new professional relationship you're building. It's not just about us getting along, I pointed out. It's about whether we can actually contribute effectively to national policy together. Our approaches to security have fundamental differences. Do they, though? She challenged. Or do you have more similar security philosophies than either of you recognized until recently? You both prioritize system integrity above all else. You both approach security as an evolving challenge rather than a fixed solution. Your differences seem more about timeline and implementation than core principles. Her assessment gave me pause. Was she right? Had our conflict always been more about recognition and control than about substantive technical disagreement? Talk to him about it, Elena suggested. See how he's thinking about the invitation before you make your decision. The next morning, I messaged my father asking if we could meet to discuss the White House committee. He suggested lunch at a small restaurant near Quantum Edge's offices, neutral territory that had become our default meeting location. He was already seated when I arrived, reviewing documents with the focused attention that had characterized his entire career. He looked up as I approached, and I was struck again by how much older he appeared since Meridian's downfall. Not defeated exactly, but carrying the visible weight of lessons learned too late. I'm guessing you received a call from Amanda Russell yesterday, he said after we ordered. Yes, the Quantum Security Standards Committee. He nodded. I was surprised when they contacted me. My recent history hardly makes me an obvious choice for a national advisory role. Your technical knowledge of enterprise security evolution is still valuable, I acknowledged. Few people understand the architectural progression that led to current standards as thoroughly as you do. Perhaps. He set aside his papers. The question is whether my participation would complicate your decision to accept their invitation. I told Russell I would defer to your preference on this. The statement caught me off guard, my father voluntarily stepping back, prioritizing my participation over his own. Another small evidence of the change Elena had observed. I'm still considering the time commitment, I said carefully. Quantum Edge is at a critical growth stage. Understandable. He took a sip of water. Though I've always found that policy influence at this level pays dividends that far outweigh the time. Investment. You think I should accept? I think national quantum security standards will be established with or without your input. Given your practical implementation experience, those standards will be stronger with your participation. He paused. But that's a separate question from whether we should both participate. I studied him across the table, trying to gauge his authentic perspective rather than what he thought I wanted to hear. And your view on that? He considered his response carefully. Professionally, I believe we could contribute effectively, together. Your forward-looking approach balanced with my historical perspective would provide valuable tension to the development process. Another pause. Personally, I would welcome the opportunity to collaborate on something meaningful after everything that's happened, but I recognize that may not be your priority. His candor deserved reciprocal honesty. I'm concerned about whether our history would distract from the committee's work, whether we could truly function as collegial experts rather than whatever. We are now. Former adversaries trying to find a new equilibrium? He suggested, with the ghost of a smile. Something like that. He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. The Westlake situation demonstrated that we can work effectively together when the stakes are high enough. National quantum security standards certainly qualify. That was a brief crisis response, I pointed out. This would be 2 years of regular collaboration. True, but perhaps that extended timeline is exactly what's needed. He met my eyes directly. Not to erase what happened, but to build something new alongside it. Something defined by mutual professional respect rather than personal history. The suggestion resonated more than I had expected. The past months had demonstrated that while forgiveness might remain elusive, effective professional collaboration was entirely possible and potentially valuable to both Quantum Edge and broader security standards. I'll consider it, I said finally, and let Russell know my decision tomorrow. As we finished lunch, conversation shifted to Maya Patel, the Northwestern doctoral student whose research had impressed me. I read her dissertation on quantum-resistant authentication protocols last night, my father noted. Remarkably sophisticated, conceptual framework. I raised an eyebrow. You're following quantum authentication research now? Trying to stay current with the field, even in semi-retirement, he replied. Her approach to threat anticipation reminds me of your early work. At Meridian, the security measures that seemed unnecessarily forward-looking at the time. Like the secondary authentication system that caught Westlake's intrusion attempts, I observed. Exactly like that. He gathered his things as we prepared to leave. Talent like hers should be nurtured in an environment that values theoretical insight alongside practical implementation. Not many organizations achieve that balance. The comment contained no explicit suggestion, but its implication was clear. Quantum Edge might be the ideal home for Maya's particular combination of theoretical depth and practical orientation. We're considering reaching out to her about joining our research division after she completes her PhD, I admitted. She'd be an asset to your team, he agreed. Assuming you can compete with Google's quantum division. We offer something they don't. Direct implementation of theoretical security concepts into national defense infrastructure. For someone with her security focus, that's a powerful differentiator. My father nodded approvingly. Lead with that in your recruitment conversation. The opportunity to see her theoretical work translated directly into protecting critical systems. As we parted outside the restaurant, I found myself reflecting on the strangeness of receiving recruitment advice from the man who had once failed to recognize my own value to his company. Yet there was no bitterness in the exchange, just the practical sharing of insights from someone with decades of experience building technical teams. Back at Quantum Edge, I spent the afternoon weighing the White House committee invitation against our current projects and growth trajectory. The more I considered it, the more I recognized the opportunity it presented, not just for influencing national security standards, but for establishing Quantum Edge as a thought leader in quantum security policy. By evening, I had made my decision. I drafted separate messages to Amanda Russell and my father, confirming my acceptance of the committee invitation. To Russell, I simply expressed appreciation for the opportunity and confirmed my willingness to work alongside all invited experts, including Richard Chen. To my father, I added an additional note. Your historical perspective will be valuable to the committee's work, as will the lessons learned from Meridian's transition challenges. I believe we can contribute effectively together while continuing to build a new kind of professional relationship. His response came within minutes. I look forward to it. Some mistakes can't be unmade, but perhaps they can be transformed into something unexpectedly valuable. The simple acknowledgement, neither seeking forgiveness nor offering easy reconciliation, reflected the careful new equilibrium we were establishing, not the restoration of what was lost, but the gradual construction of something different. Something built on clearer recognition of both our strengths and our limitations. As I prepared to leave the office, Elena stopped by with an update on the Meridian integration. Final system migration is complete, she announced. All Pentagon platforms are now running on our quantum-resistant architecture, a full 3 months ahead of schedule. That's excellent work, I acknowledged. The team has exceeded every projection. Your father's documentation was the difference maker, she noted. The architectural history allowed us to understand system evolution in ways that accelerated integration significantly. I nodded, processing this information. Has he completed the documentation project? Nearly. He's adding a final section on innovation despite constraints, essentially cataloging the unofficial security enhancements you implemented outside formal approval channels. The description made me smile slightly. A diplomatic way of documenting all the times I circumvented management directives to implement stronger security. Something like that, she agreed, though he presents it less as insubordination and more as necessary technical autonomy within bureaucratic constraints. Actually quite insightful about the tension between organizational control and security innovation. The characterization surprised me, my father reframing my acts of technical rebellion as necessary independence rather than problematic defiance. Another small evidence of his evolving perspective. I accepted the White House committee invitation, I told her. As did my father, apparently. A quantum security standards committee featuring both Chen generations, she mused, should make for interesting policy development. That's one word for it. It's a good decision, Alex, she said. More seriously, for Quantum Edge, for national security standards, and maybe for you personally as well. It's a professional collaboration, not a family reconciliation, I clarified. Of course, she agreed easily. But professional respect can sometimes build bridges that personal history can't, especially for two people who speak the language of systems and security more fluently than the language of emotions. Her observation was perceptive in ways I wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. My father and I had always connected more easily through technical concepts than personal communication. Perhaps this committee would provide a structured environment for the kind of collaboration that played to our shared strengths while minimizing our interpersonal challenges. That night, as I reviewed Maya Patel's research in preparation for a potential recruitment conversation, I found myself considering the parallels between her current position and my own journey. She stood at the beginning of her career in quantum security, developing theoretical frameworks that exceeded current implementation capabilities. I had once occupied a similar space, frustrated by the gap between what was possible and what was recognized. The difference was that I now had the opportunity to provide what I had lacked, an environment that valued theoretical insight and practical implementation equally, that saw security as an evolving system requiring both historical understanding and forward-looking innovation. Perhaps that was the unexpected gift emerging from all that had happened, the chance to create something better than what I had experienced. Not just a more advanced security architecture, but a more balanced approach to security leadership, one that integrated the best aspects of my father's historical knowledge and my own anticipatory vision. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation in any conventional sense, but it was, perhaps, a form of transformation. The painful lessons of the past year evolving into something unexpectedly valuable for the future of quantum security. 2 years later, I stood at the podium in the East Room of the White House, preparing to address government officials and technology leaders gathered for the official unveiling of the National Quantum Security Framework. The standards we had developed would shape enterprise security implementation for the next decade, guiding how organizations protected their systems against emerging quantum threats. My father sat in the front row alongside other committee members, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and something more personal I couldn't quite define. We had spent the past 24 months collaborating more intensely than either of us had anticipated when accepting the White House appointment, debating technical specifications, negotiating implementation timelines, and gradually establishing a new kind of working relationship. The framework we present today represents a fundamental shift in how we approach security architecture, I began, looking out over the assembled experts. Not just responding to current threats, but anticipating those that haven't yet emerged. As I outlined the technical foundations of the framework, I found myself drawing on language and concepts from both my own security philosophy and my father's architectural approach, the synthesis more powerful than either perspective alone. The tension that had once divided us had transformed into productive counterbalance, each challenging the other toward more robust solutions. Maya Patel, now heading Quantum Edge's research division, caught my eye from her seat beside Elena. Her recruitment had been one of my most satisfying professional achievements, watching her theoretical brilliance translate into practical security innovations that now protected critical infrastructure worldwide. After the formal presentation concluded, guests mingled during the reception. I was discussing implementation challenges with the National Security Director when my father approached. "Impressive framework," he said, professional respect evident in his tone. The anticipatory authentication standards are particularly forward-thinking. Your historical context on enterprise adoption barriers strengthened the implementation pathways significantly, I acknowledged. We had learned this careful dance over the past 2 years. Professional recognition without overreaching into personal territory. Neither of us was entirely ready to navigate. The mutual respect was genuine, the boundaries still necessary. Quantum Edge's government contracts have tripled since the committee began, he noted. Becoming the security standard bearer has its advantages, as does having the architect of modern enterprise security documenting our system's evolutionary history, I replied. A momentary silence fell between us. Acknowledgement of how far we had come from the boardroom confrontation that had shattered Meridian and launched Quantum Edge. "I've been offered a visiting professorship at MIT," he said finally. "Security architecture history and evolution. They're particularly interested in the Meridian case study, how innovative security implementations sometimes occur despite rather than because of management decisions." The position suited him perfectly, leveraging his extensive knowledge while allowing him to transform past mistakes into educational value for future security architects. "You should accept," I said simply. He nodded. "I already have. I start next semester." He hesitated before adding, "They've also asked if you might give a guest lecture on quantum threat anticipation." Your work with Maya on predictive security modeling has attracted significant academic interest. The invitation represented another small step in our evolving professional relationship. Collaborative but bounded, focused on shared security principles rather than complicated personal history. "I'll consider it," I replied, schedule permitting. Later that evening, as the Quantum Edge team celebrated the framework's launch at a nearby restaurant, Elena raised her glass in a toast. To Alex Chen, who built something extraordinary from what could have been just a revenge story. The team cheered, but I found myself shaking my head slightly. "Not me alone," I corrected. "What we've built at Quantum Edge incorporates the best of what came before, along with our new vision. The strongest security architecture always builds on foundational elements while evolving beyond their limitations." My gaze drifted to the window, where I could see my father walking toward his hotel across the plaza. His posture was different now, neither the dominant CEO stride of his Meridian days nor the defeated slump after its collapse. Just a security architect who had made significant contributions to his field, including both successes and instructive failures. Maya followed my line of sight. "Your father's historical analysis of enterprise security evolution was critical to our research breakthrough last quarter. The patterns he identified in legacy system vulnerabilities directly informed our predictive model." I nodded, acknowledging the truth of her observation. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from understanding both what worked and what failed in previous approaches. As we continued celebrating into the evening, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected path that had brought us here. What had begun as a bitter succession battle had evolved into something no one could have predicted. Not just a successful company, but a new security framework that would protect critical systems worldwide. The wound of betrayal had not disappeared entirely. Some trust, once broken, cannot be fully restored. But alongside that reality, something new had emerged. A professional relationship built on clearer recognition of our respective strengths and limitations. Not the family business I had once expected to lead, but perhaps something more valuable. Genuine respect earned rather than assumed, collaboration chosen rather than obligated. As I raised my glass to toast my team's success, I realized that sometimes the most important security upgrades aren't technical at all, but human. The evolution from vulnerability to resilience, from conflict to collaboration, from what was lost to what could still be built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.